From the campus of Rio Salado College, this is a TRANSBORDER UNIT live broadcast, a town hall meeting. It's a production of KJZZ in cooperation with Lavos and AZ Central. Hi, I'm Jim Paluzzi, and we say good evening to our live audience here in the Rio Salado Conference Center in Tempe. We also welcome our viewers around the world joining us on the KJZZ YouTube channel. So wherever you are watching, either good evening, good night, or good morning. Nearly 4 years ago, KJZZ launched an experiment. It was a new concept. It asked the question, what do community leaders and journalists have in common? What makes them different? We came to the conclusion that both journalists and community leaders have the similar skills. They're both insightful. They're both curious, they're great investigators, they're analytical, and they're great storytellers. At the same time, we recognized that the journalists and the community leaders have considerably different life experiences. So they may observe the same things, but they understand them from different perspectives. So we wondered, what would happen if we combined these two groups of professionals and took them on location to research several stories? We took two reporters, Lauren Madelon from our Fronteras partner station in Marfa, Texas, and Laura Gomez from our editorial partner, Lavos. And we put them under the editorial guidance of veteran journalist Rick Lewis. Now, you may remember Rick Lewis, not by his name, but what he created 25 years ago, the public radio program called Marketplace. We pulled him out of semi-retirement in Ecuador to lead this band. The editorial team was joined then by our three outstanding community leaders. First, Todd Sanders. Todd is the president and CEO of the Greater Phoenix Chamber of Commerce. He's worked on behalf of the business community on issues such as immigration reform, tax policy, and health care. In the interest of full disclosure, he has recently served as chairman of the board of the Friends of Public Radio Arizona. That's the nonprofit organization that supports KJZZ. Joining Todd, we traveled with Josh Rarich, who is the Senior Vice President for Communications with the Arizona Diamondbacks. And in this role, he is responsible for the internal and external communication efforts of this Major League Baseball organization. Welcome, Josh. And last but not least, Jaime Malera is co-founder and partner with the government and public affairs firm of Malera Alvarez. Before that, he served as the Arizona Superintendent of Public Instruction. Welcome to all of you. Well, after 2 years of planning, we took this team and our reporters into Colombia, a country that is far beyond our border here, but it has significant connections to Arizona. So we started off working in Bogota, and then we worked in Barranquilla and in Cartagena. And while we can only present a few of the stories that we worked on this project, all of the material is going to be online on our TRANSBORDER UNIT website in the week ahead. Throughout the broadcast, you're going to be able to ask questions. You can offer comments as well on what you're about to see and what you're about to hear. Just email us at the address you're about to see on the screen at any time during this broadcast. It's transborderunit.kjzz.org. That's transborder@kjzz.org, and that will be on the screen throughout the broadcast. So let's begin. The spotlight is on Major League Baseball's spring training here in the Valley, but the focus isn't any less intense for young people, hopefuls that the MLB is hosting at academies in places like the Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, and Venezuela. Well, what happens to a vast majority of these young academy players who don't get signed to a pro contract? Our first report from Barranquilla, Colombia, comes from Lauren Madelon about a goal that many players have. It turns out it's not necessary to make it to the big leagues to be a success. And a note to our audience, the stories that you're about to see may sound very familiar to you. That's because all of them aired originally on the radio, KJZZ.
Listen to the sound of a dream.
Okay, corriendo, team, corriendo.
We're at Estadio Tomás Arrieta, home of the Edgar Rentería Baseball Academy in the port city of Barranquilla.
Hey!
It's on Colombia's Caribbean coast. Rentería is an idol here. He had a World Series winning run in 1997 and was Series MVP in 2010.
Vamos, arriba, vamos!
Let's get going, Coach Javier Pájaro says to his team of teenage prospects. The players all want to be another Edgar Rentería. But St. Louis Cardinal scout here, Carlos Balcazar, says something else matters more.
Well, the goal is first teaching discipline to the kids to be better men.
Balcazar says that's critical given so few Latin American players will make the big leagues.
I think that's the whole thing about the sport. Playing a team sport, learning how to respect the opponent, your teammates.
Colombia is not a crucible of talent like the Dominican Republic or Venezuela. In the Dominican Republic, MLB teams run their own academies, high-intensity training centers designed to spawn the next generation of Latin America's best players. In Venezuela, baseball academies are withering as the country skates close to the edge of economic and political collapse. In the academies, teams sign, pay, and train prospects. There's no requirement to finish high school because only players in MLB's draft, that is, players from Canada, the U.S., and Puerto Rico, must be high school graduates. Meet Colombian prospect 17-year-old pitcher Sebastián Herrera.
Baseball is everything to me. I play Saturdays, Sundays. This is my life.
But Herrera says he's not focused on a pro career.
I want to win a scholarship in a United States university. That's it.
A study by the nonprofit Council of the Americas in New York says between 2 and 3% of Latin American players make it to the big leagues. In 2000, MLB sent a team of investigators to the Dominican Republic to report on the education programs of major league teams there.
There's a huge deficit in providing educational opportunities for these prospects.
Charles Farrell was one of the MLB investigators. He didn't like what he saw and still doesn't. He's a former Washington Post reporter and now runs a nonprofit academy in the Dominican Republic that mandates high school graduation for its students. We spoke to him from his office in the capital of Santo Domingo.
It's sort of understandable. Major League Baseball is not in the business of education. So education will never be a priority. Developing the next David Ortiz is the priority.
Two MLB teams have a high school education program. The Pittsburgh Pirates pay for high school until the end of the year that a prospect is released. But the Arizona Diamondbacks are the only MLB team that pays for a high school education all the way, even when the team drops a prospect from its academy. Arizona Diamondbacks Senior Vice President Josh Rawich was on hand for the prospects game in Colombia.
One of the things we try to do is actually educate these guys, teach them English, have them learn about life, not just about baseball. The best organizations realize that they are actually raising men, not just ball players, and that's something that I think we take very seriously, the Diamondbacks.
And remember Colombian prospect Sebastián Herrera? Well, here's Rawich on that.
It's neat to hear that a kid already is thinking that way at 17, and that a college scholarship is to him. That's his big leagues. That's a pretty neat thing to see.
5 other teams have a pilot program that began last year. An astounding statistic given the teams spend around $100 million each year operating baseball academies. Baseball historian Bob Ruck is at the University of Pittsburgh.
The efforts are better than they were in the past, but they're scattershot, they're uneven.
Ruck is the author of The Tropic of Baseball, Baseball in the Dominican Republic.
Because a lot of them will crash and burn in baseball before they've hit 20 or 21, and they've got little left to fall back upon.
Concéntrate, vamos, busca la bola en la zona, buenos swings.
Back in Colombia, players do nurture dreams of the big leagues, of course, but they're using their hometown patch of grass and dirt to try and make it to a U.S. college. Lauren Madelon, KJZZ News, Barranquilla, Colombia.
Josh Rawich. It's a great week to be talking about baseball in Colombia.
For the first time, actually, the Colombian baseball team just about 3 nights ago shocked the world, and they qualified for the World Baseball Classic. So probably not any of the kids that we saw; those would not have been on the on that team. But from that standpoint, it really is, I think, a big time for Colombian baseball right now.
What did you see when you were there at Barranquilla at the stadium?
Well, it's actually not that much unlike what you see in the Dominican Republic or you see in Venezuela, where these kids have these dreams, and a lot of them, they see the big dollars in the big leagues, and they think that they're going to get there. So what's really unique, I think, about Colombia was hearing some of these students, the players, talk about how the student side of what they were doing was important, and in this case, that a college scholarship is something that they aspire to attain. And one of the really, probably to me, the most unique things that came out of this trip was that as soon as this piece aired on NPR for the first time, we actually got a call from an administrator and professor at ASU who heard the piece, thought this was fantastic, and wanted to figure out how can we take the Diamondbacks education program in the Dominican, where we're getting high school educations, and get them college educations at ASU. And you think about what if we're able to pull something off like that started from a trip like this, it's really pretty powerful.
How realistic is it for a good player to expect a college scholarship?
I don't know that I could give you specific numbers, but I do think that with the volume of colleges out here and the Division I, Division II, Division III type programs, there are endless amounts of dollars that can be used on students. And ultimately, I think, particularly in Colombia, if they can get to that level where they are seen the way the Dominicans are seen, the way the Venezuelans are seen, or the Puerto Ricans are seen, we know plenty of players. Actually, one of the top players in baseball, Jose Bautista, went to a U.S. junior college and ultimately wound up getting drafted in the system and is now doing exactly what all these kids dream of. So it's certainly not unrealistic. Obviously, the percentages are small, but pretty possible.
Todd Sanders, you are a dual citizen, U.S. and Colombia. Colombia doesn't have a sterling reputation as being the baseball magnet that, say, Venezuela or Dominican Republic. What's happening?
Well, sadly, we haven't been that great in soccer either, but hopefully that'll change in the next World Cup. But it is nice. Growing up in Colombia, and my son makes fun of me because he has to sort of explain football, American football to me, not what we played in Colombia. And so soccer certainly was it dominated. Baseball wasn't as prevalent. And to see baseball become something that's really focused on, especially on the coast, is really fun. But I got to say, thinking about some of those kids that we saw, and you saw in those pictures, that these are kids who really come from a lot of poverty. For something like, for an organization like the Diamondbacks to guarantee a high school education, which is hard to come by in the third world, and then for ASU to say, well, why don't we take that to the next level? That's tremendous, and I really like that something like that is happening here in Arizona.
Jaime, you saw the young people turning out, and in the video you saw the 5-year-old kids turning out to see 16-year-old kids play. Right. You're involved with youth organizations as well. How does this strike you?
Well, the thing that was also important to me was that, remember how many parents were there on behalf of their kids? It was incredible. They were in the stands cheering on their kids, and it seemed like there was a sense of community where they were feeling like it was not just, and the organizers really did stress that fact that it was not just about learning baseball, it was about learning life. And afterwards, when we were taking pictures and we became the focal point, and people were kind of surrounding us and were interested in what we were doing there, it was a lot of fun just to get to know them and to see the excitement that they had, that, here's our kids getting this kind of opportunity, again, not just with baseball, but with other kinds of things and the possibility of education. That was very powerful and very moving.
Just to show how community leaders and journalists can work together, Josh practically saved the life of our reporter, Lauren Madelon. You want to explain?
Well, I believe at one point we were talking to the commissioner of the Colombian League, and we kind of look, I'm turning this way, and I look out front, and there's Lauren taking pictures about 3 feet from where he's on the field, right next to the batter. A foul tip would have absolutely killed him, and I immediately stood up and got the commissioner to try to help get the umpire to move Lauren at least to the opposite side of the batter so that he couldn't get hit with a foul ball. But I will tell you, Lauren did a tremendous job. He was everywhere. He was in the dugout, and at one point we actually looked up, and in between innings he was interviewing the umpire standing halfway up the first baseline. So it was quite an adventure to get down there, and really, I think from our standpoint, the way that this can continue to grow is what you guys were gracious enough as supporters of NPR to send us on a trip like this to go and get these sorts of stories. And it's really cool that some of the results may be something like a partnership that ultimately leads to college scholarships.
Very good. Right now, cities in the Southwest, like Albuquerque and Houston, are pinning the future hopes of our mass transit on a system known as bus rapid transit. This is called sometimes BRT. It replicates light rail and underground subways with an exception. There are dedicated lanes and stations, And this is at a far less cost. So San Diego and Los Angeles already have BRT, while Phoenix, with the passage of Proposition 104, may include money for BRT as well. We sent Lauren Madelon from the Baseball Diamond to travel on the world's largest BRT. This one is in Bogota, because it's a system that the U.S. urban planners are studying at a time of stressed public budgets. Let's watch.
Before getting on board, a look at the ballpark numbers. 1 mile of subway can cost $250 million or more. Light rail, 20 to 50 million. BRT, well, the conversation starts at 7 million per mile.
Okay, bueno porque es rápido.
I like BRT because it's fast, says a passenger, Carlos Arturo. In Bogota, BRT is called Transmilenio, a play on words that refers to the millennium year of 2000 when it opened. The system moves close to 2.5 million people a day across one of South America's major cities. Bright red buses are articulated, meaning 2 sections with an accordion-like middle for turns. They run in dedicated lanes. Stand on a bridge at rush hour, and you see clear bus lines parallel to a snake of traffic. BRT feels like a subway, but it's all above ground.
We're gonna board one of the lines that go to the south part of the city.
Dario Hidalgo was the deputy general manager of the system when it opened. Today, he's the Bogota-based researcher with the nonprofit World Resources Institute's Ross Center for Sustainable Cities in Washington, D.C.
The cities that really work for people are the cities that are designed for the people to move around, not the cities that are designed around the cars.
In Bogota, BRT is part of a greater reconsideration of what makes a city work. Hidalgo says Transmilenio helps make a city work by physically starting at society's edge.
The original design was the terminals to be in lower income areas.
There are growing pains, though.
The level of service is not the standard that the people deserve.
Passengers have variations on the same theme. Great system, but often a smothering blanket of people, crowded platforms, and a battle mentality at rush hour to get on and off. And passenger Valeria Montoya says it's sometimes rough for women. I push back to defend myself, she says, referring to groping, a common complaint. So right now, we're stuck in traffic. It's part of the routine in Bogota. I traveled with Transmilenio's new CEO, Alexandra Rojas, by car on the way to a station. She wants more buses to relieve overcrowding, but she says any deficiencies are trumped by a system that matches a city's need, which is why U.S. urban planners are looking at BRT.
I'm not into cars, but maybe if you were into cars, we all would love to have a Porsche. And it's beautiful, and it could be really, really, really nice to solve your transportation needs. And if I have to move 150 people just to follow that example, I would probably not use a Porsche, because public policy is always about implementing decisions with very limited resources.
BRT plans in Albuquerque and Houston, a form of BRT plan for Phoenix, BRT in San Diego and Los Angeles, all are a nod to the notion that you can get here to there more cheaply.
BRT has become this very important contender.
That's Carlos Felipe Pardo. He heads a nonprofit research group in Colombia called Despacio, or Slowly.
The BRT normally is something which is good for anything above 10,000 until 40,000 passengers per hour per direction.
Above that, and Pardo says a metro might be suitable. Below that, he says the choice is light rail or BRT.
Light rail is competing in capacity and demand with the BRT, but the BRT is really much cheaper.
Again, urban sustainability researcher Dario Hidalgo.
So many cities in the U.S. are considering BRT as an option to light rail or other forms of mass rapid transit. But there is always a big debate, because the people that love trains will always love trains.
The Institute for Transportation and Development Policy in New York monitors BRT worldwide. It says another part of the debate is America's car culture. Dedicated lanes mean taking lanes away from cars, and the political will to do that in some instances just isn't there. I'm Lauren Madelon in Bogota, Colombia.
Todd Sanders, you grew up in Bogota. You've seen the problems of mass transit with an infrastructure that's not satisfying the public need. How does this Transmillennial apply?
I honestly think it was a game changer for Colombia, for Bogota in particular. Not too long ago, it was illegal to make a left turn in Bogota because the congestion was so bad. And there were all these private operators, so there wasn't any kind of uniform system in terms of the rapid transit system. Now, pesos are scarce, and if we look at Phoenix, we were talking a little bit before this, we look at Phoenix, we're thinking about $47 million a mile for light rail, and that's expensive here. You can imagine for a third world budget, BRT, $7 million, the ROI is huge. And there's a play on words. They call it lleno, right? So that means basically saying it's just full. And it is full. And you saw it in those stories. But I think that in terms of a city that's limited in terms of infrastructure and then resources, I really believe it's a game changer for so many people. We were in the south of the city, and when you think about where those people have to travel on a daily basis and the distance, and if they didn't have that, I mean, it would probably take them 3 hours to get into work versus maybe an hour or 45 minutes. So it truly is a game changer.
Josh, were you surprised in a country that supposedly is a third world country to see so many cars?
I was actually, and the traffic was just, it was unbelievable. I grew up in Los Angeles and spent most of my career before moving here in Los Angeles, and when you've got to have a system where people can only go on the road depending on what the last number of their license plate being odd or even, because you can't have that many cars on the road, it's somewhat mind-blowing. But I think from a transmillennial standpoint, to me, what was most surprising, I think, was that they're a victim of their own success, and it's such a valuable tool for people to use going to and from work that it's literally, I mean, they are packed in there. We watched one of them go by us, and it was about as you cannot fathom. You take a New York subway and multiply it by 10. So it was surprising to see, but ultimately, I think it's the right system for them.
Jaime, you saw the numbers. Subway is about $250 million for a mile. The light rail, Todd mentioned, about $47 million. But BRT is about $7 million. What, from a public policy perspective, what does that say to you?
Well, and then the other piece you left out is like what the city of Tempe is looking at it with a trolley with, $70-80 million a mile or something crazy like that. I think one of the things that we have to discuss and have an honest conversation, particularly when you're talking about strained budgets and very difficult decisions that cities, counties, states have to make with limited dollars, is where can you get the biggest bang for the buck? A lot of the discussion that we had was about a lot of people may not go for this in the United States because of the perception that they'd rather have a train than a bus. Right? It's just that it doesn't seem that it's beneath them to be on buses and it wouldn't be as effective. Well, I think when you're talking about, again, strained budgets and applying dollars to things that, in my opinion, are a bigger bang for the buck. Education spending, having a strong community college system, looking at all those things that can add to an economy. You certainly need a strong transportation system, but let's look at ways to spend the dollars efficiently so that you can spread those dollars to other areas of impact too.
As you know, we're taking questions from around the world and from our studio audience as well. Go ahead and feel free to add them. This just in from Ecuador. Rick Lewis, who is the editor on this project, writes in, "The best journalism tells you something you didn't already know. This diverse group of topics meets that standard and demonstrates how the engagement of community leadership can be part of the mix. Nobody has done anything quite like this before."
Just to that point, a side story, and Josh talked a little bit about Lauren Madelon. He was on this Transmillennial doing this story, and somehow he met somebody who knew a senator, and by the afternoon, he was in the Colombian Congress meeting with former President Uribe, doing a story on the peace process. And so I think that's absolutely the case. I mean, you never know where it's going to take you. And for me, as a Colombian, that is such a powerful thing. And for someone who is a journalist just landing there to be able to get that story and talk to the president and talk to some of the folks who are opposed to it, I thought was tremendous. So absolutely, Rick.
Speaking of the peace process, We can share a few things with our audience. For example, Josh's favorite restaurant that he ran into in Colombia. Do you remember Crepes and Waffles?
Oh yes, Crepes and Waffles, great spot.
So there's a story here,
They're on every
folks.
corner. It's like McDonald's down there.
42 restaurants in Colombia and Ecuador called Crepes and Waffles. What's interesting, it's sort of like a breakfast, dinner, luncheon place that has crepes and waffles. It's kind of why they name it that way, yes. What was most surprising, though, is that every one of those 42 stores is staffed entirely by single mothers. There's no shortage of single mothers in a country that has experienced 30 years of civil war and 250,000 dead. And what an incredible experience it was to watch how the Colombian people can pull themselves up through this. You know, one of the things that was probably most memorable in my mind as we were riding through the streets of Bogota was listening to the peace talks coming out of Havana by the Norwegian ambassador, who spoke very good Spanish, explaining how one of the agreements is no matter how serious a crime you committed, if you were a member of the FARC, if you confessed your crime, no matter how serious, the worst you would experience would be 8 years of community service. But if you didn't confess and you had to be tried, minimum 20 years of service and hard labor. It's that kind of very difficult discussion that goes on in a country in terms of how do you get to peace. And the transmillennial really is a sign of it all because it ties so many people together. Okay, let's move on. Since the financial meltdown of 2008, microloans have taken off in the United States. There are now hundreds of institutions lending small amounts to people who don't qualify for credit cards or traditional bank loans. U.S. microlending has taken a cue from developing countries like Colombia. There, up to 50% of the economy is generated by small businesses that are often funded by loan sharks. It's against that backdrop that microlending developed in Colombia. Here's Lauren's report.
Microfinance became a buzzword in the world of social development when Muhammad Yunus won the 2006 Nobel Peace Prize for his Grameen Bank in Bangladesh. Today, Grameen's in 11 U.S. cities, and Acción, the country's largest microlender, works coast to coast with major operations in Texas, Arizona, and California. But let's go to Colombia,
Esperamos 45 minutos a que esté.
a developing country where microloans, $25 or $50 up to $1,500 or more, are big business. The idea is to give loans to people who can't get credit. Elizabeth Abe is in a steamy cinder block kitchen in Barranquilla on the Caribbean coast. She's preparing food that she sells to street-side stalls.
Olla de presión que se le llama aquí en Colombia.
I've got beans in a pressure cooker, she says. She got her microloan from Opportunity International, a Christian faith-based organization.
Bueno, la comida la vendemos acá en el mercado, en el centro.
We sell in the central market, she says. So how does someone with no collateral get some? Collateral for her microloan of $150 comes from others in a group of loan recipients. If someone else defaults, someone else, in theory, picks up the tab.
Microfinance is one of these ideas that sounds really good in theory.
George Washington University international business professor Noel Moore. He says microloans can be complicated. One Mexican microbank was slammed for charging 100% on its loans. A study at Yale found that one microlender charged 200% to its poor clients. Another study at Stanford concludes microcredit does not significantly alleviate poverty in developing nations and that, in some instances, microcredit makes life at the bottom worse.
It is not an easy panacea, nor is it one of these motherhood issues that I think everyone should just sort of blindly get behind. If it goes wrong, it can go really wrong.
Bogota, Colombia. Colombia's a crucible of microlending. There are 7 for-profit microfinance banks here. The World Bank's microfinance office for all of Latin America is here. The World Bank's invested in one of those banks, Banca Mía. Here's Banca Mía's senior VP, Margarita Correa Hinao.
Las personas de la base de la pirámide.
Helping people at the bottom of the pyramid translates into profits, she says, that she says are a must if microlending's to be sustainable.
Por eso esta industria.
This is a business, Correa says. Collaterals put up by foundations or agricultural cooperatives. The bank serves its clients one-to-one. You file a business plan. If you make the cut, you're paired with a formally trained banker.
Obvio que hay algunos que se quedan morosos.
Some people are delinquent, Correa says, but as is often the case in microfinance, the default rate is low, 4 to 6%. But when you speak with people here, they don't just talk profit and loss. They all talk about avoiding loan sharks. Boris Lozano's an analyst at Banca Mia.
Up to 20% per day is the rates that loan sharks get here, which is stupidly high.
To get a sense of microcredit in the U.S., we spoke with New School economist Lisa Servan in New York. She's professor of international affairs and urban policy there.
There is a myth that the field is a little bit responsible for itself, that the programs can cover their own costs.
Servan's the author of the upcoming book, The Unbanking of America. It documents how U.S. banks fail to provide affordable financial services as growing numbers of Americans on the margins need them.
Programs started developing kind of in the late 80s and early 90s in this country. There was this thought that they were close to self-sufficient in the developing world, that we could get there too. And then we figured out that it actually cost a lot of money to make the loans.
Despite those costs, commercial microcredit is growing in the U.S. But Servan says you're never going to find one solution to poverty and economic development. She says many small solutions are needed and that microcredit is one of them. Lauren Madelon, KJZZ News, Bogota, Colombia.
And we're on the floor of our audience here, and with me, Stephen Clausen. Hi, Steve. How are you?
Very good, thank you.
Now, you are the owner-operator of a kitchen design firm, Affinity Kitchens in Scottsdale.
Yes, that is correct.
How does a person who is involved in kitchen design connect us to Opportunity.org, the NGO that you saw in this report?
Well, in 2008, we had the great opportunity to have our first trip down to Colombia, and that is where we actually were able to see firsthand an organization that I would suspect is very unique in providing microloans to the poor.
You saw the people who are the recipients of the loans. What kind of impression did you get when you saw them?
Well, the first impression, of course, is you're very sad for the situation that so many people find themselves in. But then very quickly you see when an opportunity is given to these people, they so terrifically want to take care of themselves and their children and their families that they take this little opportunity that's given to them, and with a little bit of guidance, they build a business. And then they build a bigger business, and then they're hiring their neighbors, and you see an incredible, the panel talked about it earlier, and I think maybe Colombia is one of a very special nation that way, but they have a strong sense of community there, and you see how badly people want to help each other.
Someone who may be watching might ask, well, there are plenty of needs right here close to home. Why are you attracted to be involved with an organization that is not close to home?
That's a good question, and we ponder that all the time. I believe very strongly as a business owner that we need to look after our own community, and we are involved with the homeless right here in Phoenix on a regular basis. That being said, I think it's a great responsibility for us as Americans to show and teach and share some of the great things that we have going on here with those in third world nations.
Steve Clausen, thank you. To our members of our board, Jaime, you saw all of this firsthand. In Barranquilla and Bogota, we went into the areas that are not considered where most people from the United States get to go. What did you see?
Well, what I saw was, it was very interesting. Individuals that would take out very small loans and maybe purchase a refrigerator or something that they could store their seafood so they could then cook it in the morning and sell it. It was very things that we just take for granted that were literally changing people's lives. And what struck me was because I've always been influenced by the Peruvian economist Hernando de Soto. He was the author of The Other Path and The Mystery of Capital, that talks about how educating individuals and the power of capital on what they can do to transform their lives. And he always wrote that the problem is not a financial crisis, The problem is a knowledge crisis. And what I was most struck by, particularly with Opportunity, was the knowledge portion of not only giving them that $80, $100 loan, which we think is nothing, but again, it was transformative. It was that education that was part of it, and the community emphasis that was a part of it, that to me, that then it multiplied itself. So the individuals that were able to pay it back, you often found, or what they were telling us, is that they would able to pay that back. They were not on the cycle of debt, but then they were able to take a new loan to expand their business and then pay that back so that their businesses were constantly growing. And that, to me, that was, like I said, that was a very moving experience, especially when you saw the hope in their eyes when they would explain in the excitement about what they were doing.
We didn't get into the report, but one of the things we saw in Barranquilla was how they educated young people in terms of how to handle money. Did you find as an educator that that was an interesting approach to an NGO that works on microcredit?
Well, that was one of it was just what a fun day that was. When you saw a number of kids, they were talking about, it was a democracy in action too, with money and the ability to decide how they're going to spend their dollars, how they're going to invest their dollars. They would have their community forums. The kids would put in the money into this, essentially the vault that they would keep, and then they would make decisions as to how they were going to be spending those dollars, or how they were going to reinvest those dollars. Or if a person wanted to take that money out and use it for their own education, or use it to buy a dress, or use it for things that they might want. But it was that education portion of it, it was that knowledge that to me you could see them learning, so that as they had access to capital, that knowledge to me was the more powerful piece of it, because knowing how to use that capital, to me, that's going to be transformative.
Josh, I see your head nodding up and down throughout that whole explanation from Jaime. You saw the same?
Yeah, and I think what struck me, actually, oddly enough, tying it to the baseball, the dreams that these baseball players had, what I thought was really cool was one of the afternoons we had a chance to go and see a bunch of the women who were part of these trust groups that were basically building their dream homes on paper. And it was, I mean, we talk about the American dream. This was the American dream. You're watching people with little pieces of graph paper put together what would be a 3-bedroom house that's probably 300 square feet. And for them, this is some far off distant concept that they might be able to get to, but they're all doing it together, and they're encouraging each other, and they're working together. And if one of them isn't going to be able to help pay off the loan, again, this concept of the trust group, it's the same thing. It's the same dream we all have about trying to get a home and trying to do better for ourselves. And we're watching it play out for us right there in Colombia. It was really, the whole thing was, what Opportunity International is doing down there was really, really impressive. And you can't say enough about the work that's being done down there by them.
Todd, when we arrived, we were surprised to learn about something that is basically called status in a legal sense in Colombia, where every household is in a neighborhood, and every neighborhood has a zone, and your price you pay for electricity and water and Wi-Fi is all different based on where your house is located. And we went into the lowest status communities and still saw houses with electricity, running water, and Wi-Fi. How does that work?
Well, it does go back to something that I remember so clearly. I turned to Jaime, and I said, they're for the grace of God go our kids. Mm-hmm. And so, I think what was interesting about that is that what Steve just said is that these people are just like us, and they're, but for a geographic accident in strata 6 versus strata 1 in Colombia, or vice versa. And so, I think that Jaime and Josh nailed it. What Opportunity does, and it's easy to be skeptical, and you should be skeptical when you're talking about loaning to poor people, but they empower people. So, if you're in the third world, it's not like here, right? I mean, you can be homeless here and there's a safety net. If you're homeless in the third world, that's a bad deal. And if you're poor in the third world, you're probably always going to be poor. If you're rich, unless something bad happens, you're always going to be rich. And I think what this does is break that cycle of poverty, which I think is very powerful. You empower people to learn how to save, how to create a business, and then how to succeed. And to Josh's point, the same thing with these kids. And so, the thing that struck me too is that we're in strata 6, or I can't remember, whatever, 1 or 6, the lowest one. And embarrassingly, I'd never been there. I lived in Colombia a lot of my life. I'd never been there. And these people who have nothing offered us lunch. And I think that's part of what opportunity teaches these people. And I really do think it's important for us to see them not as victims, but as people who we can empower to succeed.
Josh, what did you think when you came into that first status 0 home in the barrio where they had a pot that was being fueled by wood from a house that fell down and had chickens in the pot?
You know what's funny is it's weird, but I felt like I was in someone's home. She welcomed us into her home and treated us like she had known us forever. And then you come inside and you meet all the other people that are in the trust group, and it really was. It had an amazingly home-like feel, and yet you're obviously on the other side of the world and not speaking the same native tongue because I'm not a native speaker like these guys, but they certainly treated me as though I was and welcomed us into their home, and it was honestly from every stop along the way, whether it was the woman who got a $75 loan and now she runs the hardware store in her little neighborhood. She also had about a dozen puppies that she was dealing with as well at the moment, but or the belt making, the family of 9 with a father and 7 kids all involved in the making belts, and how this all started with a simple loan and it's growing into what they're doing today. It really was mind-blowing.
Todd, on a related subject, Delmar is watching online and asks, how will the Zika virus and the political military violence affect Colombia's future economic and cultural development? What do you think?
Well, as far as military violence is concerned, Colombia's been in a civil war for over 40 years. And I think, as you talked about, and we alluded to the fact that, we're looking at an end to that violence. And Laura, who will be speaking soon, it certainly can tell you that this is a different country than it was. And when you think about Colombia and political violence and military violence, it's nothing like it was. So I see a nice future for Colombia, a lot different than it was. On the Zika virus, I'm concerned. It's a very difficult thing to deal with. We certainly don't have a safety net, and you have kids that are born with these conditions. It's going to be very difficult. My wife and I looked into perhaps adopting, and if you're an American, you can't adopt from Colombia. But if you are an American and there is a kid that's disabled, there's such a huge demand that you can adopt those kids. So I'm afraid there's going to be a pretty big influx of kids that are going to be affected.
Something we'll need to watch as we go forward. For our last story, we go to a story out of northern Colombia, to a town called San Basilio de Palenque. This town was declared by UNESCO in 2005 as a masterpiece of the oral and intangible heritage of humanity. This rural town, located near the historic coastal city of Cartagena, was in danger of seeing its unique language vanish, a challenge that Arizona's native communities are fighting daily. So our reporter from our editorial partner, La Voz, Lara Gomez, has this story.
From the moment the sun rises over the green hills surrounded Palenque to the late hours at night, there is hardly a moment of silence. Domino tiles stomp against the wood table near the plaza. Sound system called picos blast tunes of vallenato music, a rhythm born out of the Atlantic coast of Colombia. The squeaky brakes of a motorcycle and the roar of another one that zips by. And the alegre and llamador drums. Palenque is filled with sounds. Sounds that day by day are a living representation of Palenque's unique culture. That's José de Jesus Valdez, an MC part of a local hip-hop group called Combi Les Amis, singing in his native tongue of Palenquero. These lyrics translate to, I want for us to strengthen, let's not allow our grand lengua palenquera to be lost. Lengua is how locals refer to their native tongue of Palenquero, a language derived from Central West African dialects with a Spanish-based alphabet and lexicon. It is the only Spanish-based Creole in South America. Today, locals can be heard chatting palenquero over a round of cold beers, elders converse lengua below the shade of a guama tree, and parents teach songs to their kids in palenquero. But a few decades ago, in the mid-1980s, locals and scholars were convinced palenquero was at the brink of extinction, a fate not uncommon for native tongues worldwide. University of California professor and linguist Armin Schwegler remembers the imminent decline he saw in the years following his first visit to Palenque in 1985.
It was so stark that all of us reached a conclusion that this was a downhill slope from which there was no return.
In the 1940s, palenqueros started migrating to neighboring cities of Cartagena and Barranquilla to sell fruit and candy. There, they were met with discrimination for their black skin, for their sing-songy spoken Spanish, for speaking their native tongue.
It was so stigmatized, and attitudes towards anything black were so strongly negative that there was no way that somebody reasonably could have thought that this could ever change.
Palenque was founded at the turn of the 17th century by hundreds of fugitive African slaves who fled the slave port of Cartagena. These runaway slaves settled in a region surrounded by hills, which served as a natural fortress. They called the town Palenque. In 1713, before Colombia was even a country, the Spanish crown recognized their independence. Yet, it wasn't until 1991 that the Colombian government recognized in its constitution the heritage from the descendants of Africa. In the Atlantic coast, during the 1980s, palenqueros began to see their native language as detrimental to their acceptance and assimilation to city life. Sebastián Salgado, a community leader in Palenque and high school teacher of palenquero.
Era objeto de burla. Entonces ya muchos padres.
He says many parents and grandparents were the object of ridicule in the cities and were hurt by this treatment.
Entonces cuando ellos regresaban a Palenque, ellos empezaban a regañar a los hijos, a los nietos.
When they returned to Palenque, says Salgado, they'd scold their children and grandchildren and say, "Don't speak lengua palenquera." Not because they agreed with that, says Salgado, but because they didn't want their children and grandchildren to go through the same humiliation. Another linguist and palenquero scholar, Carlos Patiño Rosselli, wrote in 1983, "The finalization of the historical cycle of the palenquero language does not seem very far. But in Palenque, that did not happen."
Entonces ya a finales de los años 70, empezó la lucha.
At the end of the 1970s, says Salgado, the lucha, the fight began to get palenqueros to speak their language, both in Palenque and outside of Palenque. Laura Gomez, KJZZ News, Palenque, Colombia.
Joining us in the studio, Laura Gomez, reporter. Laura, why did you want to do this story about this vanishing language in this small town way off the coast?
You know, the more I learned about this town, first of all, I had no idea that there was such a unique community in Colombia. And I'm from Colombia. I was born and raised there. And I didn't know that there was a town founded by fugitive African slaves way before Colombia was even a country. So to me, this was very interesting to explore a history that I didn't know about my own country.
How difficult was it to get to Palenque?
It was a bit of a trek. So you have to. I flew into Cartagena, and from Cartagena you have to take a 30-minute taxi ride out into the bus terminal. Then you take a bus. It takes about an hour and 15 minutes, and then the bus drops you off right outside of the town. It basically just pulls over and it drops you off, and then there's locals from Palenque that. You get in the back of their motorcycle and they ride you into the town. So it was very interesting.
Nothing you won't do for a story. Well, you mentioned in the report that back in '84 the end was near. You had a couple of researchers say exactly the same thing, and now it looks like things have been reversed. What has changed?
So before there was a generation that was trying to teach their children only to speak Spanish, because Spanish was the language that would get them to economic success. But now, I mean, I was there, I saw the little kids speaking in lengua, I saw parents, happily saying lengua outside of their house. Before, as an outsider, they wouldn't even speak to me in lengua because it was embarrassment. It was, they would be embarrassed to do that. But they were happy to show me their culture. You get into that town and there's music and people talking and wearing their traditional braids, and it's a very special place.
Were they surprised to see you?
I think they're very used to tourists and journalists by now. After the UNESCO declared them, recognized their culture, they've had a lot of journalists and scholars coming to the town, so they're very used to it, I think.
Do you see many parallels to the situation with vanishing languages in the United States and the Native communities?
Yes, I think it's very similar. This town almost lost its native language, and when you lose a language, you also lose cultural traditions, history, music, legends, songs, and I think that's happening here in the U.S. as well.
Good report, Laura. Thank you. Todd, you grew up in Colombia. Did you even know the Palenque were there?
I'm with Laura. I had no idea. But as I was listening to her story, I was thinking about a story that was on KJZZ this morning about Navajo kids, that they're actually taking it upon themselves to learn the language so that they can keep it alive. And thinking about when a time us in Arizona know that those kids weren't allowed to speak Navajo, and Hispanic kids were told not to speak Spanish. And so, interesting parallel.
Question came in, I'm going to give it to you, Jaime. It comes from Hayden Evanson. What did the people that you met in Colombia think about the microloans? Were they happy to receive them? Were they embarrassed? How did it strike you when you talked with them?
No, they were extremely excited. I mean, at least every home that we went into, every person that we talked to about this program, it was a sense of accomplishment, that they were taking this amount of money. And again, these were truly microloans, $80, $100, and they were talking about how it was transforming their lives. When we went into that family that was making belts, they were extremely proud of the growth of their business, and a lot of these businesses, by the way, were their homes, right? They would make these belts on top of where they would live, and it was just a sense of pride and accomplishment that they were able to now have a foundation that they could build for their family and for their kids. And that seemed to me incredibly powerful, because it wasn't a sense of, well, luckily I got the loan. It was a sense of, this is what we're doing and this is how we've been able to be successful.
Thank you. As we wrap up here, I'd like each of you to kind of share with us your thoughts about how it was working with journalists. What surprised you? What made sense to you? And what you'd say, what were you thinking? Josh, you want to lead off?
Well, I would say maybe I might have been the least surprised, just because in my daily job I work very closely with journalists, and they're usually sports reporters. And I grew up in a journalism household with parents who both worked in the field and one who taught journalism at a university level. So I can't say that I was surprised by the lengths to which that they would go for their stories. But it is really, you alluded to it, Jim, at the beginning, just that we all do see things very differently. And there were times where I'm seeing things that I remember at one point we were looking at the kids who were learning how to save. And I see a young girl and her little brother, and it was obvious to me they were brother and sister. You could just see the way they were interacting. And afterward, I went over and talked to them, and they were the same age as my two kids. And it was this kind of amazing recollection as a parent. I saw it from a parent's perspective. And then I looked at Lauren, and Lauren is looking at it from a skeptical perspective, and, well, why is this way, and why isn't it that way? And so we all do see things very differently based on our own life experiences, and journalists are trained to think skeptically, and that's why they're very good at what they do. And so, to me, that was probably the really great thing, was that we all come from these different backgrounds. We see things differently, but we travel together and probably learn more because we were together than we would have if we were on our own.
You're not a stranger to journalists. You have your own TV show as well. What surprised you?
Well, and it wasn't a surprise, but I got to tell you, I was incredibly impressed with the passion and devotion that Laura and Lauren showed for what they were trying to do and getting the story right, and really making sure that everything they did was right. Although I do have to say that Laura and with the aid of Todd Sanders tried to convince me that cumbia music actually came from Colombia. And we all know it's from Sonora in Mexico. Probably Nogales. That was probably so that was the only thing that she a little bit sketchy. But other than that, it was incredible.
Okay, so you and Josh and Todd had the experience of being in Cartagena the night that Miss Universe was wrongly crowned. What was it like?
That was a great story. We were in we were doing investigation. By the way, it was we weren't doing anything. We were in a bar, but it was all investigation. And when we're getting to know the crowd, and they didn't even want to deal with us. Yeah, the gringos are here, but we were watching the Miss Universe pageant, and Miss Colombia was in the finals. And then of course we got to know them, and she wins, buy drinks on the house, and we're hugging, we're dancing. Josh almost knocked down the TV because he was waving the Colombian flag. And then with the infamous Steve Harvey comes out, and we were ready to revolt, I think. We were going to go and storm the Miss Universe pageant to get it right.
But the best part for me was that, Colombians, Steve Clausen was saying that Colombians are a lot like Canadians. Well, we tried and we didn't make it. And the guy who was angriest and just that is not fair was the guy from Mexico. He's like, this is not going to stand. Where's the revolution?
Josh, I think you broke the news on your Twitter feed.
I did. It was just really unique to have been in there in that exact moment. I mean, honestly, if we had walked into the bar 10 minutes earlier, 10 minutes later, we probably don't have that experience. And so we captured what was probably one of the earliest photos of Colombians celebrating, and then they have no idea in this photo what is about to happen to their crown. And so I saw Darren Ravel, a sports business reporter who I work closely with over 1 million followers, and shot him the note, "You're not going to believe what we just saw down here." And he put it out there, and it just, boom, took off. And as Twitter has a way of doing, I can't say it quite went viral, but certainly being a photographer on the scene for a moment that big was pretty unique.
Todd Sanders, you get the last word. What was the experience like?
It really was. It was very impactful. Like I mentioned, this is embarrassing that I had lived there for 13, 15 years, and I had never been past what is downtown. 4 million people live on the other side of that, and this gave me an opportunity to see a part of my country that I never knew. And just like now what I did, I discovered a part of my country that I never knew. And I got to do it with a group of people who on a professional level I know very well and I respect, including you, Jim, and to do that with them and be able to share my country with you. And then with two reporters that I think probably are the gold standard of people who could have gone with us. Laura and the work that she did, I mean, think about that story and the impact of that story. And Lauren Madelon, I mean, I would, if I was a reporter, I'd ask probably 2 kind of people in, and when we'd do this, he'd be doing story after story, and then he'd be interviewing the bus driver. And so just to see the dedication of these people and what it takes for us to see something, for instance, we at our house, we watch the evening news at late at night, we DVR it. There's a lot that goes into that, and it's what we do here at KJZZ. It's what we did to do this, and it just it made me incredibly proud.
Thank you. Thank you, Todd. Thank you all. That concludes this town hall broadcast from the TRANSBORDER unit. Our thanks to our entire KJZZ team for their support on this project, along with our colleagues at Lavos and AC Central and MCTV. Great work by our reporters, Laura Gomez and Lauren Madelon. A special thanks goes out to the Friends of Public Radio Arizona, Evelyn Kasuga, our chair, Lou Stanley, our executive director. Without our Friends organization, we clearly could not do a project like this. Importantly, thank you to our panelists, our brave TRANSBORDER unit explorers, Jaime Malera, Josh Rarich, and Todd Sanders, for trusting KJZZ, putting your lives in our hands to help provide content, context, and experiences that I hope you'll continue to share with our community. And finally, thank you to our live studio audience. You've been very well behaved, and There's still food left. And to our viewers throughout the world, we hope that this hour has helped you to create a better vision for how we can become citizens beyond our world, beyond our borders. So from the campus of Rio Salado College in Tempe, Arizona, thanks for watching. Good night and good day. Please feel free to stick around. There's food. Talk to our panelists, talk to our reporter.